Hey everybody, welcome to Compassion and Courage, Conversations in Healthcare. This is the podcast where we teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. I'm Marc. I am a keynote speaker, healthcare consultant, author, and adjunct faculty member teaching compassion science to pre-meds. And today, I thought we would frame this story today because I've got my friend John in the studio. Hey.
Hey, how you doing, bud?
I'm good. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. This is amazing.
so whenever John and I we're doing this in the studio today because you're here visiting and hanging out at my house and having a little bit of vacay time. But I thought we'd kind of frame this conversation a little bit about compassion to a friend or a relation or a relationship. How do we show compassion to people who are going through a great loss? How do we do that? And for me, when I was 18, 19, 20 years old and going through transition into blindness and all that kind of stuff, when I think back on that time, I think of one of the people that was most there for me during that time was you. And so I thought we'd maybe highlight a couple of those stories today. There's probably some stories that we should not tell in public.
And we won't.
But so I was thinking about this too. We met in like the 80s, I believe.
Yeah.
I believe it was like 89. Does that sound right?
89, I would say that, yeah.
And you were probably 15, I was 14, and we met through church youth group activities like across the state where your mother was our youth pastor and youth leader. And so
Correct.
That also meant that you were always there, which meant that every time I went,
I never missed anything.
Yeah, nor did I. Such good times, man.
Yeah, it was fun.
I think about those times and how foundational and formational they were. And
it created a good base for who we are today.
Most certainly.
Yeah.
So let's. You were a year older than me. Still are a year older than me, and you had already started college a year before I started. So you went to college out of state up in Minnesota.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I went to 2-year VOTech in Minnesota.
And you were studying something that you can only study at like certain schools around the country.
2 VOTechs in the whole country, one in California and one in Rosemont, Minnesota, that did supermarket management. Mm-hmm. So I could get an associate's degree in business management specifically geared towards the grocery business.
Such a niche area, right?
Yeah.
Such a niche area. And you stayed in the grocery business for 20 some odd years. But
26, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But so let's go back to that time when you're 19 years old, you're in college, and you get a call about your buddy Marcus from somebody that tells you something's happened. Do you remember that call?
My mom actually is the one that called, and she told me about your accident. And my mom, she exaggerates things sometimes, so I had a hard time believing that the accident was as bad as what it was. But I made a couple other phone calls to some mutual friends and realized that it was that bad, and it was a trying time in my life because I thought, just like me, you were indestructible. Mm. You don't think about that at that age, and seeing where you're at now and how life has progressed, you are an amazing guy to me and very much an inspiration.
Thank you.
But yeah, it was a scary phone call at that point because I was a long ways from my family and my support group, and then something tragic was happening to a very good friend of mine.
Yeah. And your mom did know that intimately because she was there in the ER that first night, along with many of our mutual friends from that time. Do you remember the first time we were with one another after my wreck?
That was in Colorado, wasn't it?
No.
Wasn't it?
I don't believe so. I think you came out to the house maybe once or twice.
Oh, you know what? I did.
I was still in recovery, but I wasn't in the hospital.
Yep.
And I remember when you came in and we started talking, it was it didn't seem to matter that I was laying there attached to a feeding tube or blind. You just talked to me like you'd always talk to me.
Yeah, because I didn't know any other way.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, I mean, you're still the same person inside that you were then to me. You know what I mean? And I've always tried to treat you the same.
Well, I ain't changed that much
No.
in the time. I remember you, though, you were the first person to ask me when you were at my house during that first year of recovery. I remember you asking me, so what do you see?
Yeah.
And it was like the first time I think somebody had put that question to me. What do you see? And I was like, I just see black. And you're like, doesn't that get boring? I'm like, well, I suppose it does. But, I was picturing, and I still do to this day, constantly picturing everything around me. But you having the kind of the insight or maybe even the courage to ask that question, like, so what do you see now that you don't see?
It was probably more ignorance than courage, but yeah, because most people I'm sure everybody's thinking it. I'm just the only person that would ask it. I remember talking to you then about your car, because you had a car and driving around the field in the back. I remember that conversation.
That I was driving around in the field in my back? Yeah.
No, I mean, not every day, but just to, because that was such a big part of your life, driving that. Was it a green?
Had a 72 Pontiac Le Mans.
That's
It's
it.
kind of a green/baby show color.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't say I remember the driving the car around, but I do remember that first summer that I was laid up. My dad having to go buck bales, picking up bales, and so I drove the truck, and he'd jump off, grab a bale, throw it back on, and just said pull up another 3 or 4 feet, and could do it easy enough. Whenever I went to Colorado. So I went to Colorado, to go to rehab school, and I remember hearing the story about a gentleman who, he was a young man at the time, maybe a kid, maybe 8 or 10 years old, and this kid's 8 or 10 years old, totally blind, and works on the farm with his dad. And a social worker or somebody like that came by and said, we need to send your son. You need to send your son there. Off to the school for the blind in the state. And the father said, who would help me with the farm work? and it was really a true statement. It's like, who would help me with the farm work? And I often think about that with many blind people that I know. It's like, from your parents, you get shown, you're going to keep doing it, what you're doing. Fairness and equality with kids.
Yeah. God, and you think about a blind kid on a farm. I mean, farms are dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, but that's what you do. I mean, the parents needed them on the farm. Sure. That's the rural America that we grew up in.
Yeah. So let's go to Colorado then. So a year after my trauma, we had maybe hung out for like 1 or 2 days during that year.
Yeah.
Then I end up moving to Denver to start the Colorado Center for the Blind. And you were living in Boulder, working your first post-college job.
Yeah. I got recruited by a grocery company that had several stores in the Denver area. And they wanted me to work at the one in Boulder. So they moved me out there, and I was out there, I don't know, maybe 6 months or so, I think, when you moved out there. And I'm like, well, this is kind of cool. Our paths are crossing again, and that was, to me, it was a big growing time in my life. I was at that age where, okay, this is my first job, and the first time I had dental insurance, and just being a grown up, cooking my own meals and doing my own things, supplying for myself. And I'm like, here's an old friend that I can hang out with. But you were going out there to go to school too, so you were busy, and I was working full time and stuff. But it just seemed like almost every other weekend, like clockwork, I would make that trip. It was only a half hour from our apartment to your place, and we'd hang out at your place or at mine, more at mine, because I think you wanted to get out of that situation where you were. But it was fun. We had a good time out there.
I think back on that time as I have a lot of mixed feelings about that time. It was still a time of transition from trauma for me, and learning stuff, and I didn't like being told what to do. I guess I probably still don't like being told what to do. And I was in a school environment that, it was teaching me, but it was also challenging me and testing me. And I didn't know anybody else in Colorado. I had a couple of cousins and relatives, but I didn't know anybody else. And I would go to school with these people. Well, who else are you going to hang out with on the weekend except the same people? Yeah. And after a while, in I don't want to say dormitory environment, because it wasn't dorms, it was apartments. But I just remember like going, okay, Friday afternoon, John's going to be at my place at 5:00. We're going to grab some food on the way back. We're going to hang out all weekend. Yeah. And that was such a time of respite for me to be able to hang out with you, with somebody who would continue to treat me just like our friendship had been for 5 years or more before that. And, you were kind of helping me escape.
Well, I think it worked both ways, because I didn't have much. I was working and just trying to figure out life, and being that age, it was hard, but seeing what you went through made my situation seem a heck of a lot better. You know what I mean? And not that what I had was easy. You know what I mean? I didn't have any problems or anything. It just seemed that like my life was pretty good then, So I think we helped each other out.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. You remember Thanksgiving that year?
Vaguely. I think that's one of those memories that you remember more than I do, but I do remember it, and I know, just through our conversations over the years, it was a big thing for you. It was for me too, but we had nobody. Yeah,
I was going to say, it's like you had your roommate and maybe a girlfriend and one other friend who was out there.
Yeah.
And you're 1,000 miles from home. I'm 1,000 miles from home. I had only been at the school for maybe 6 weeks, so I decided I was not going to go home for Thanksgiving, and instead got the invitation to come to your place and spend the Thanksgiving holiday. And just even though I was so far away from my family, it was still like we were our own little ragtag group of people that got together. And
I remember trying to make it normal, just like a everyday, Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Yeah. And growing up, I never had a normal Thanksgiving, which is probably why I wanted that one for us to be, normal, but yeah, that was, yeah.
There's so many times then, and even over the years now, that even over the last couple of days since you've been here, that I think about the compassionate. We've talked about this. I feel like you have a greatly compassionate heart, and you feel like, nope, I need people to be accountable. I deal with that kind of too. The struggle between compassion. We often say that the difference in the opposite of compassion is not cruelty, but the opposite of compassion is judgment. The opposite of compassion is judgment.
Yeah.
And so but we all judge, right? We're all constantly judging to say that this room feels too hot right now, or my butt hurts from this chair, or my stomach hurts from last night. No, that's my head that hurts from last night. But we're constantly judging. But you, at least as far as my blindness and our friendship, I was never shown any kind of judgment that I did anything wrong. And you were always on the lookout to try to make sure that I, number one, not only got the physical assistance and help that I needed, so I wouldn't go walking off a cliff or something. We were in Boulder, but then also you never made me feel like you were bending over backwards or having to go out of your way to help me in any way.
I never bent over backwards and never had to go out of my way. I think where we were in our lives, that we were good for each other then, and even now, but you wanted to prove to yourself that you could do things. And I wanted to see you do that. Is basically what it boiled down to. And I remember walking through the mall with you, and this was, how many years ago when a mall was a mall. They're very different now, but, you just said, hold on to your car keys. You had your stick. You didn't have a dog yet, but you had your stick, and you thought the stick made you look weak. And so you didn't want to use the stick. You wanted to get around without it. And I'm like, here, you want to hold on my shoulder? No. Just take your keys, hold them in your hand, and I'll zero in on that, and I will follow you. And I mean, the malls had little ramps going up, not steep ramps, but little ramps and stairs. You just zeroed in on the me ringing the keys, and you figured it out. And I was just like, oh my God.
It's just little tips and techniques and tricks that you would never think of, and that's the work that I was doing at the Colorado Center, was that kind of orientation and mobility work to what are the ways that I can keep my, I don't want to say that. I was going to say keep my disability discreet, but I don't necessarily, and I think that was my feeling at the time.
At the time,
these days I'm kind of like more, own who you are, what you are, and just rock it.
Right.
Right. Just be yourself.
But I think that was a different day and age.
It certainly was.
Not only for us, but society as a whole. You know what I mean? And I just don't think society was as open to people with disabilities then, or at least in our eyes.
Well, think about this, too. You were looking at supermarket management, and you had been working in the grocery and retail kind of area for a while, but it was only 3 years before my blindness that the ADA was passed.
Correct. Yeah.
So people who needed to get assistance in grocery stores, or even get into the grocery store with a ramp, or something that made the mobility impairments more, could get around those mobility impairments a little easier. That wasn't required until 3 years before I lost my sight.
That's crazy.
It is, isn't it? And now that's 30 some odd years in the past.
You're making us old.
I know. But
yeah, I mean, and it wasn't that you were ashamed of being blind, or that's not it at all. You just didn't want people to think less of you because you were.
Yeah,
that's the impression I got anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's probably true, because I thought less of myself. I thought less of blind people. Why was that? Societal teaching.
Correct.
I always say I am the first blind person I ever knew. So I didn't know any blind people. I had no idea their capabilities. What do you know when you're ignorant?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And I don't know about you, if you knew anybody who was blind before.
I didn't.
Yeah.
No.
I often talk to people who say, kind of like I say, I am the first blind person I ever met.
Yeah.
So,
which that probably shows my ignorance, because that's why I asked you those questions at your house that time. I wanted to know, and I didn't know any better, so I'm asking the questions.
Yeah, and we've navigated a lot of things that way of just asking questions. I also think about we were talking about driving earlier, right? Mm-hmm. Did I drive on the lake?
Yes.
Whenever I was up at your place?
Yes, and your wife did.
Yeah, I remember she did, but she's braver than me and sighted.
Yeah, yeah. That you. So after Colorado, you went and did your thing, and
I went to college and such, and you went back to Minnesota.
Pretty much went back to Minnesota and just settled down into normalcy, and you came up years later because you had a wild hair to go ice fishing. And so we went out ice fishing. That was fun. And for anybody out there who's never been in an ice house, take a trip. It's fun. It's just a unique thing to do. But
I'll go fishing with you.
Yeah.
You got the ice and the house, and I'll go fishing anytime.
And when you talk about your blindness and how amazing the one thing I remember most about you with the ice house is it's a 10 by 10 square, and you said, okay, just stand me at the door, tell me what I'm looking at. And that was the only time I had to tell you where the holes in the floor were, and you missed every hole. There's 4 holes in the floor, and you missed every hole every time.
Good.
Yeah.
Because that's the last thing I want to do is break a leg out in the middle of a lake, frozen over lake. Bring a ambulance out there that weighs more than 3 Mack trucks, and I don't want to be out there with a broken leg. So, yeah. And that's something else, that I appreciate too. I feel like recreation is something that many blind people miss out on, right? It's harder to recreate when you're blind. You may not be able to independently take a boat out onto a lake to go fishing. You may not be able to independently get to the, whatever,
Right,
the
exactly.
amusement park or the beach or whatever. There's things that make those harder. And yet, whenever you and I have recreated together and vacationed and taken our wives on vacation and done group vacations and things like that, I feel like there's never. I feel like people are just themselves. Instead of saying, "Oh, well, here's a place that Marcus would really like to go because it's nothing visual; it's all sound,"
right.
or here's this experience that's for that helps other people. To me, it just like no, we're not looking at the lowest common denominator of the group that
Yeah.
Mark can only enjoy these certain things. That's just always been something that I've appreciated.
Yeah, but that's you being you too. You'll do anything, and go along with anything. And if you don't like it, you'll still do it, and then tell us when you're done. I don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah. Well,
But that again is a relationship we have too. And then as we talk about compassion and things, and one thing I think when I think about it is in order to be compassionate, you need to listen.
Yeah.
And I think I listen to you and what things you want to do and what's important to you and how you are, and because of that, then I can be compassionate towards you, not your situation. Your situation isn't anything to me, but just you as a person to be compassionate towards.
you keyed in on a great word right there, which is just listening. Right? It's amazing what we can discover about other people and then adjust our behaviors and our words and such to accommodate that person. If there's something that I know that you're extremely sensitive about, I don't want to hurt you. Right. So I'm going to listen to you and hopefully pick up on some things that show me the areas where you may be sensitive or vulnerable, etc. And then steer away from those or be very cognizant of those. And that's not something you do unless you actively listen to people.
Yes. Yeah, you can learn a lot about listening. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. My mom always said you should shut your mouth and listen a little bit more, and she was right. And so over the years I've learned to do that, and I'm still. If you ask my wife, I still am not a very good listener at times, but I try to. I try to listen and know what people want. And
when we make an intention to listen to other people and get the viewpoints and perspectives of other people, I mean, how can we not be? Just that simple act of listening is a compassionate gesture.
Yes, I would agree.
And then if you can, how do you want to say? You want to expand off of that to actually be able to put those things in place and be present for somebody who is suffering. That's what we get to do.
Yeah.
What we get to do. So I know we got a little bit of time here left, and God bless you, man. I got to thank you so much for being not just my friend for all these years, but for being such a faithful listener of the podcast. It's like every time we talk, you're like, hey, you had that one lady on that was done that. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that did happen. So thank you for being such a faithful listener of the podcast. And you know that I always throw some rando questions out for people at the end.
Yep.
But I'm not going to give you any of the ones that you've ever heard before.
Okay.
So,
because most of your guests are way more intelligent and educated than I am, so don't make them hard for me.
Don't make them hard.
What color is the wall? Got it.
I might not get that, but you got it. So you and I are both big music lovers, right?
Yes, sir.
Classic rock, 80s, 90s rock. What is the best concert that you have ever been to?
Garth Brooks.
Garth Brooks?
Yes. Yeah. Garth Brooks and then the Rolling Stones.
Where was Garth Brooks?
Garth Brooks was at the Xcel Energy Center in St. Paul.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking that was 7 years ago. In fact, I wore my cowboy boots that are gray from the 80s.
I can't believe you have cowboy boots.
I do. They look great with those white jeans I wore in high school. Man, they look good.
You still fit in those white jeans?
No. I mean, I could, but I'd have to really need some help getting into them.
Yeah, you need some Spanx.
But I wore those cowboy boots just because this is the first country concert that I ever went to. And man, that guy can put on a show.
Oh, man. There's a reason he's been Entertainer of the Year for like decades.
Yeah. And he relates to so many people. It's just amazing. Then the Stones were a close second. We saw them at TCF Bank Stadium, an outdoor stadium. It was raining that night that we saw them, but their music is better. I mean, Garth connects with a lot of people and puts on a good show. The Stones put on a good show, but they have amazing music. I love the Stones.
We got another 30 years of cranking out music before Garth Brooks did too, so they've got a wider catalog. Yeah. Makes sense too.
Yeah.
Okay, so to go off of that, is there a specific, this kind of, don't think I'm like, hitting on you here or anything like that, but is there, is there a specific song that when you hear that song, you associate that with me, or you think of me with that song?
One of our, it's weird why, but Green Day, anything by Green Day, because that's when you're more musically inclined than I am. And it wasn't an argument we had, but it was just a deep discussion about, I don't even remember which song it was. I'm like, I like Green Day. And you're like, you realize that's 3 notes and that's not music. And, we just kind of had a little banter going back and forth. And so now every time I hear a Green Day song, I think of you, and not in a bad way at all, because you're absolutely right. When, you open my eyes to like, Green Day just isn't all that, But that
would have probably been in '94, and Green Day was at their height of popularity. Yeah.
When they had 50,000 people worldwide that loved them, and that was about it.
Yeah,
I was one of those people.
I was thinking about this song, or about this in relation to you too, and you, not you two as in Bono and The Edge and such, but you as well, and. The song that I would think of was Sweet Child of Mine by GNR. And the reason why I think of you with this song, I remember hanging out at my apartment in Denver. And again, this is a outdoor, how do you want to say it? It's an apartment complex where all the doors actually go out into the elements. It's not like so you look down, everybody opened up their doors and we're on a balcony and look down on a courtyard. Yeah. And so you could hear other people's stuff going on in other apartments as you would. And I remember you and I hanging out there and just talking, and all of a sudden, like, you jump up and you start messing with the radio, the stereo in the room. And I'm like, what are you getting? So he's like, you're like, man, I heard Guns N' Roses. And I'm like, what? What do you mean you heard Guns N' Roses? And what had happened is you had heard somebody in another apartment that had the song on and had cranked it up. I wasn't hearing it, but you immediately knew that if you went to the stereo, you could turn on the radio and scan through and be able to listen to the rest of the song.
You only had 20 stations. It had to be on one of them.
Well, yeah, and it was probably only on about one of 3.
Right, exactly.
with the genre format. I remember sitting there going, how did John hear that and I didn't? I was like kind of jealous of your supersonic hearing at the time.
Usually it's the other way around. You hear way better than I do. But for that, for whatever reason. And I do remember, like, growing up, that 18, 19, 20, that range, when you used to put the amplifiers in the car. Guns N' Roses, AC/DC, just, you hit the power booster button on the radio and just jam that with your windows down.
Had the old 6x9 speakers in the back window, right? You probably bought at Walmart, saving up all your money. Yep.
Put them in late at night playing video games and drinking Mountain Dew to stay up all night.
I probably drank more Mountain Dew with you than anybody in my life.
I'm surprised I still have teeth sometimes, because that's not good for them.
You are from south of the river, so they'll fall out soon enough.
From where you grew up, I'm the deep south.
20 miles south. Not terribly deep, but still. All right, and so last question for you is, do you have a favorite book? If you think back over a lifetime, I know you're not an avid reader, but do you have a favorite book that you would return to, or one that you've read that just really impressed you?
Huh. Yeah, I should remember. I just finished one up like 2 years ago, and I went back and redid it, an audiobook. Just again like 6 months ago. 1 minute after, and it's about a magnetic bomb that's set off, and just what happens, and it's this guy that kind of kicks his family into survival mode, and and I'm not a doomsdayer or survivalist or anything. It's just the way that book was written, it really made you feel like you were living almost in that moment. And
this is fiction, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it could just kind of transport you into that kind of thought, and then it opened up your eyes to, okay, so what if something bad or catastrophic happened? And granted, with the pandemic that was going on and stuff at the time, you had tendencies to just think of that kind of stuff anyway. So it was interesting, because I was like, well, I have enough propane to get me by for 6 weeks, and then you don't think about that ever again. But I remember thinking that. It's like, well, who the hell thinks about how much propane they have? But
a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
But and then there was two other, that same author wrote 2 other ones, and they were good too. But that first one, 1 minute after, was a very, very good book, and it wasn't too bad.
Too crazy. Okay, yeah. I'm gonna have to check into that.
Yeah. What's your favorite book? You read a lot.
I do read a lot. Yeah. My favorite book of all time is A River Runs Through It by Norman MacLean, which, if you've seen the movie, the Brad Pitt movie, I never saw the movie until after I read the book, and I read the book whenever I was very much laid up at home after getting discharged from the hospital, but before Colorado, was when I read that book, and whenever I read it, I immediately went back and reread it. And
really?
I still, to this day, it's probably been 2 or 3 years since it's a short book, but I do try to read it every few years. It's just a return to not only great writing, but there's whenever you start to mix fly fishing and religion and philosophy all together, it's kind of like, wow, that's super cool. And so one of my bucket list items, bookmark that for your bucket list items. But one of my bucket list things is to get up to Montana to be able to do fly fishing in the rivers up there. Yeah, that's kind of one of the things I really, really, really want to get to. So anybody who's listening, if you're in Montana, you could probably get me to come up there for really cheap. All right. So what about you? What's a bucket list item thing that you want to do, been waiting to do?
God, I haven't thought of anything lately. Life is really good. I mean, we get to do a lot of things. There's not much we want to do anymore. I shouldn't say one like it's over, but we do a lot of things, and we're at that point where the kids are grown and gone, and we're comfortable enough where if we want something to do, we just pretty much go and do it. I would like very much to go see a World Series game in St. Louis again. I think
we'd all like to see a World Series game in St. Louis,
and
except
the way
for
they're
maybe
playing
Chicago.
now, I don't think that's going to happen. But
this
not
year.
For a couple of years. But that was we went to a World Series game there in 2016. Was it 16? Yeah, and it was amazing, and I would like to go with some friends. We went with some acquaintances and had an amazing time. But I would like to go with friends and see what that would be like. That would be awesome for me to do.
Did you ever read Ozzie Smith's book?
Yes, I did.
Came out in like the 80s, and
yeah.
I remember, or maybe early 90s, and I remember him saying in there that he said there is no electric in the air, no energy of any sporting event that can ever match the energy of the beginning of the 7th game of the World Series.
Yeah.
It's been such a long season. People have built up to that very moment. He says there's no excitement in the world. Now, granted, he's never been in an NFL locker room right before the Super Bowl or those types of things. But still, it's like I think of that all the time. It's like, what would that be like to, even if you're not in the game, if you're not a player, but you're there in the audience, you've just got to feel it like vibrations in your soul.
Yeah. We were at game 6, I believe it was 6. And I mean, granted, I'm a diehard Cardinals fan, but I am tearing up just walking into the thing, and I couldn't imagine those players. But I do know like hockey players, professional hockey players, and that's such a team sport. Whereas baseball can still be an individual thing. So I could see where, you know, a single game could mean more to a baseball player than a football or hockey or basketball player. Yeah. It just seems like those sports can't be carried by one person.
Yeah, I guess that's very true. Very true.
Not the way that a baseball game can, anyway. But
well, we could sit here and talk sports and baseball for a while, but
and music,
and music, and vacations and such like that. But for real, man, thank you for being part of the podcast today. Thank you for staying my friend for these 35 some odd years that we've been friends, and
never have to thank me. Thanks for having me here. This is amazing, and thank you for the same things. Thanks for being you. I mean, if you weren't you, I couldn't be me. That's
a lot of foundational experiences that made us who we are today.
Yep, agreed.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining myself and my buddy John Vollertsen here to talk about how do you show compassion to someone who is going through loss? How do you stay present for those people and give an empathetic response? And so I want to thank you all for being with us for this episode of Compassion and Courage, Conversations in Healthcare. I'm your host, Marcus Engel. This is the podcast where we teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. Please visit marcusengel.com for any needs that you have for upcoming keynote speeches, for leadership development, for recruitment and retention of hospital staff, for inspirational keynotes, for corporate events. All those things can be found at marcusengel.com. Thank you so much for being with us today on Compassion and Courage.